other invited guests online. So I think the respectful thing to do is call this meeting to order, and hopefully Councillor Wilson and Councillor Journeau will join us shortly. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? Councillor Butler.
Yes, I'd like to add, please, in closed session, I'd like to add deliberative matter. It would be item 15.2, please.
Thank you for that. Any other suggested changes to today's agenda? I will take that then as a motion from Councillor Butler to add to today's agenda item number 15.2, a deliberative matter. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And may I have a motion then to approve the agenda for today's meeting with that addition? Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harantby. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of November 3rd have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If not, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of November 3rd, 2020 as provided? Councillor McGrath, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We also have been provided minutes of the special meeting of November 10th, 2020. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If not, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the special meeting of November 10, 2020 as provided? Councillor Butler, thank you. All in favor? Councillor Wilson, you were there, but I've lost you now. If you can orally give your vote, I would appreciate it. Or your hand is up. Thank you. There are none opposed then. That motion is carried. We have a number of presentations for today, all dealing with enhanced sidewalk seating and retail extension or expansion in the downtown core. And first among the presenters, I have Mrs. Pavlov, and it's nice to see you on the screen rather than just have a telephone connection. So welcome and thank you, and please feel free to proceed.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. Good morning, and good morning to Council. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning on behalf of the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce. As you know, there is a discussion afoot regarding renewing patio seating for the 2021 season, and I have taken it upon myself, I guess, or on behalf of the Chamber, to contact the same businesses that we contacted in the spring when the initial proposal to have expanded seating available to anyone in the core area between 400 and 600 block west side of Connaught and both sides of the 400 to 600 block of Patricia Street. So in this particular instance, I had 113 people on my list, of which at this stage I have spoken with 87. So I have still 26 people that I am working towards getting in touch with. I have some callbacks on my list now and hope to have all of the completed responses by the end of this week. Hence the reason why you do not have a written report in front of you as of yet, because since Friday afternoon, I've gone from 46 in favor as opposed to 33, which was on Friday, and I've gone up to 38 in favor with values applied from 32. So the numbers are still changing. I can tell you that this report is fact-based, that we are providing to you anecdotals that are quotes from the businesses that we've spoken to. There are some residential reach outs that we've had, so to speak. And so we have included those in our comments as well, and they are noted as such and will when you get your final copy of the report. The JPCC has no agenda with this report other than one caveat, and the caveat is that we appreciate your indulgence as we work to finish getting all of the statistics together, and also that we would request that council put forward a decision regarding the renewal of patio seating or extended patio seating for the 2021 season as soon as possible. Our executive and board has, as part of their strategic planning, identified January the 15th of 2021 as the latest that they would like to get this information in order that they can share it with businesses. And as I go through this information with you, you will understand why having a decision sooner rather than later will certainly be far more productive for all involved. So I will carry on with the statistics. I apologize you don't have a written copy, but it is changing faster than I can send you one. So having said that, I have left it open to secure all replies, as many as I can possibly get, until Friday, February the 20th, at which time I will call it, so to speak, and I will give you all the statistics that I have as well as the anecdotals, and that will also include suggestions. Again, remembering these are direct quotes. So I can tell you 113 people or businesses were on the list. You should be aware that the businesses were all canvassed regardless of their sector, their size, or their business/nonprofit. So this did include nonprofits, government offices, and it also included any businesses that were or were not necessarily having street front operations. So if you were in a mall, pedestrian mall as it sits right now, like the clock tower, or where Totems is, or Everest Outdoors in that area there, it didn't matter if you had a street front entrance, we contacted you. So everybody from dentists to massage therapists to retail outlets to hospitality, and of course a couple of nonprofits, one government agency being Canada Post, and a few other nonprofits that work on behalf of the community as well, including, of course, our location at Robson House in the 400 block of Patricia Street. I can tell you that this data was collected over 5 regular business days, 1 statutory holiday, and 1 weekend day. Messages were left with each business whenever possible, noting that outstanding responses are from initial calls beginning Thursday, November the 8th, and they will remain in the queue until Friday, November the 20th, after which an update of this report will be completed. I can tell you that of the questions that were included, the first one being, are you aware of the proposal to renew extended patio seating? Are you in favor of the renewal, yes or no, and why? Are you in favor of renewal with values applied? I will qualify values applied as some sort of tweaking to what the policies, parameters, procedures, that type of thing goes. Are you in favor of standardized motif for all patios? Are you in favor of municipality of Jasper investment in the program? And that can include anything from streetscape enhancement and tax incentives to offset infrastructure costs to business. And are you in favor of businesses accessing parking spots with a square footage fee attached? So that would be where the municipality would come into play when determining policies and procedures. So of the 87 people who have replied to date, I will tell you that 46 are in favor 100% with no attachments. 38 people are, or businesses rather, are in favor with some tweaking to the policy. And I had 3 solid no, not in favor. So overwhelmingly then that gives you some statistics that say 87 were in favor 84 were in favor. A little better than half, 100%, 38 were in favor of going forward with some tweaks, and the solid no was 3. So our total respondents to this point are 87. I can also tell you that many respondents were generally aware that there was some discussion. However, they were unsure of the exact nature of the new renewal. Would it be the same as last year? Would there be changes based on the appearance of it, the localities, the size, that type of thing? Many were unsure of the time frame. Was it meant to still be a seasonal May to October situation, or were you looking at a year-round or definitely an ongoing? So unsure of that renewal time frame, 1 year or an ongoing would happen every year. So are you in favor of the renewal? The responses were varied, with emphatic yes or no being expressed, and as shown in the initial number reporting. Recurring comments are, and you will see this when you get the written report, my apologies again, are bolded. So you'll hear some things that I will say bold, and then you'll know that that was a repeated theme. Businesses with limited seating due to COVID can maximize their short season. It creates a warm and welcoming atmosphere in the downtown core. That is a bold item. Canmore's approach was fantastic. It meant the difference between survival and closure. People are looking for more outdoor options. That was a bolded item. Feedback around town from residents, visitors was very positive. It added significantly to the Jasper quote unquote vibe. That was a bolded item. Really hopeful it happens. Great for all around. Done quite well considering the short time frame to get set up and operating. That was a bolded item. 100% absolutely necessity for Jasper's economic survival. Safety is the #1 priority for residents and guests. Go a step further and close Patricia Street access on the 600 block to all vehicle traffic to the Grocery People's location. Bolded item. Great attraction to the downtown core. Bolded item. All for it. Loved, loved, loved the boardwalk installed by one particular business. Install paid parking to encourage people to move along, or pay for the privilege of accessing parking in the immediate or closely located parking lots. Additional bike parking. That was a bolded item. Willing to adapt to the greater good, also a bolded item, came predominantly from businesses as opposed to residents. 100% support. Can a plebiscite be used to decide definitively? So that was a question. A bold item, exclude 400 block of Patricia to accommodate post office and ease of displaced parking in the 500 and 600 blocks. Bolded item. Easy access to parking on west and east side of Patricia in the 400 to 500 blocks. Lower speed zone helps. So I got another one here that says increase the number of 30-kilometer flashing signs so that people are more cognizant of the fact that they have entered those areas. Maintain current designated pickup drop-off location by the Jasper Adventure Center. Businesses wanting to partake should pay all associated costs. That was a bolded item. Boardwalks are a great deal. Consider that as an aesthetic option. Bolded item. Allow more rooftop patios. 100% in favor. Much of business comes from pedestrian traffic. And one business said, my tune has changed. I saw an uptick in pedestrian traffic and business. So this was an individual who was initially opposed to the sidewalk seating in the spring when this first review was made. It created buzz in the downtown core. The 2020 pilot proved it can work and does improve business economic recovery from COVID. Made those outdoor spaces lively, and can we do it through the winter too, please? Welcoming vibe, so characteristic of Jasper. Would love to see more merchants participate. Created a hub of activity in the core and didn't miss the 2 parking stalls in that particular business. Bolded, didn't do it in 2020, but will definitely pursue it in 2021. Every business should have the opportunity to participate. Comparatively, cannot business outshine Patricia Street efforts? I guess that would be up to where you're located to give a comment on that. Comparative, reopening of Whistler Campground will require restaurants to have more seating capacity. It was awesome to see businesses sharing the patio space with other businesses. It kept the patios going all day long, so it kept a lot of activity in the area. The no comments, these were the 3 that were definitively no, they don't want to see it come back. There was a struggle to move about with wheelchairs, strollers, walkers, etc. A bolded item, servers clearly struggled to walk through the pedestrian traffic to serve tables. So that was in the case where you had your seating on the street and your servers had to go from business through the pedestrian crowd on the sidewalk to perform their services. Servers clearly better signage opportunities. If it was to maintain or stop the spread of COVID was the reason for the initial patio extensions, then it failed miserably. Taxpayers must not be expected to pay for any required barriers, cones, etc. Damage to merchandise, wind, rain, fading remains an issue. It's not likely to reconsider a retail expansion to the sidewalk. And the final one for the no is my business will not survive another summer with no immediate parking. Any person with mobility challenges needs access to the services offered. So that was a very emotional no when I had the conversation with the business owner. There were several suggestions in the essence of time and knowing that there are other presenters. I will read to you strictly the bolded ones. And these are respondents who said, yes, they would like to see it happen with values added. And as explained earlier, values added could be tweaks to the motif, or to the policies, to the operations, that type of thing. So addition of additional parking being designated to mobility challenged or disabilities. Definitely consider standardization motif. It appeared too random, almost who could be the most garish. So you can see I get a lot of comments and I'm giving you all of them, not holding anything back. In favor of renewal, but absolutely it must be more eye appealing. Many patios were circus-like. Standardize the tent policies. It must be applied to all patios, whatever the decision is. Municipality needs to invest in streetscaping, i.e. planters, etc. It was sorely missed this past summer. Wholeheartedly support patios, but those businesses need to pay for the space they are adding to their overall square footage. Enforced parking regulations by bylaw for all designated parking spaces, 15-minute and 2 hours, specifically were 2 of the timeframes mentioned. The boardwalk concept must be put in place. Servers need to be able to do their jobs without maneuvering through pedestrians to street seating using the sidewalk. With some more strict aesthetic tweaking, it should be tried for at least another year. No real benefit to particular businesses, but understands the idea. Garbage being left behind was a problem. Businesses with patios especially should be responsible for making sure their areas are kept litter free. Definitely tilted toward hospitality operations, and during COVID times, it's more than acceptable. Either way, decision needs to be made ASAP. In favor, but make it aesthetically pleasing, please. Whatever decision is made, it needs to happen very quickly to give notice to those who will have to make adjustments, i.e. infrastructure, etc. Standardization should still allow for branding. So that's something to keep in mind. They want a little bit more of a standardized motif or appearance, but still allow for branding of that particular business. Set a clear and unmovable date to have the patios closed for the season and remove their setups ASAP. I will tell you now, just in conclusion, that there were no opinions expressed by 4 groups, one of them being Canada Post, and 2 being nonprofit groups that operate in the area. I will also tell you that one of them that was in favor, that is a nonprofit, is also a commercial landholder. So that in a nutshell is my report. It is much longer, but I don't want to drive you crazy with that. So with that, I will tell you that that is what I have so far. I have more to come, and I'm open to taking any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mrs. Pavlov. I apologize that I was locked out for a bit and missed it, but I can go back now and have the benefit of reviewing that presentation so I can bring myself up to speed. In the meantime, are there questions from councillors for Mrs. Pavlov? Councillor McGrath.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Pavlov, for the presentation and for all of the work that went into gathering this information. It's much appreciated, certainly. Not a question, just a comment. I wrote down lots of notes and really great information for us to have. And I'm really excited to move through these questions and to move through these decisions, and hopefully in preparation for next summer with enough time. You know, with February 2020 or 2021, sorry, being a possible date to receive official documentation by, I would hope to have something built into the 2021 budget so that if we are streetscaping or if we are looking for any capital expenditures from the municipality anyways, that we have that built in for our planning next summer. But really valuable information, accessibility, additional parking, streetscaping, possible closures, the litter aspect are all things that I have written down in front of me to discuss at future meetings. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Mrs. Pavlov?
I'm sorry, I neglected to mention that I understand that this item must go before PDAC, and I know that is quite a process. So the chamber would like to be able to contribute to that PDAC hearing whenever it is scheduled. And of course, again, reiterating, the sooner the better, so that businesses who do have to invest can budget to do so, to make infrastructure changes and to do some planning. Thank you.
Thank you for those additional comments, Mrs. Pavlov. Any other questions from councillors at this time? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mrs. Pavlov, very much. It was really valuable information. I just want to touch on the parameters for businesses to submit their feedback. I understand that you approached 113 businesses. Did I have that right?
That is correct at this time, yes. There has
so
been some
that
change to the landscape since the initial request was put forward in March or April.
So that in effect is essentially all of the businesses you've included.
That is correct.
Reach. Okay. And so business, you've heard from 87, and businesses have until the end of this week to get back to you if they haven't yet given you their feedback.
Yes, I'm conducting callbacks all through this week, and hopefully I can reach the 26th by Friday.
Sure.
Like I said, was very successful this past Friday and got a hold of 18 over the course of just Friday alone. So I'm hoping I will have as much success in the next several days.
Well, that's great. And it's a good rate of feedback already. And hopefully the fact that you've appeared today and will help to get the word out to any businesses or others who wish to provide feedback and haven't yet done so. So thanks very much. It's good information. I'm looking forward to seeing the written report.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any other questions from councillors? It appears not at this time. So again, thank you, Mrs. Pavlov. I think we all look forward to receipt of the full report when it's available. But thank you for that valuable information this morning.
Our pleasure.
That takes us to the second presentation, Brett Ireland, Bear Hill Brewing. Good morning, Mr. Ireland.
Morning, everybody. So, okay,
Please proceed.
Okay, thanks. I was going to share my screen here. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Thumbs up.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, well, thanks again for having me, and Patty, thanks for collecting all that feedback. So I just wanted to kind of follow up from what I'd spoke about in the spring before we went into this strange summer that we just went through, and just kind of recap what our experience was and some of the feedback I heard from some of our peers on the patio extension program. So going to talk about it in three sort of sections around the safety perspective, some thoughts on the impacts, and then provide some feedback in terms of what we see as maybe some next steps that council and the administration can consider. So first, just want to begin with thanking the town and the town administration for their urgent action in the spring that resulted in a meaningful impact on the community. I think it's important that we acknowledge it was a lot to get through quickly, and thankfully it was before the summer hit. So we all look forward to the days ahead. We can line up, as you see in that top picture there, shoulder to shoulder for Jasper Canada Day parade again. But until then, we need to continue to build trust with our visitors to protect them and the community. I think it's important that we consider this. I'll mention this a few times, but I think what the program did for the summer was not just the safety perspective, but it also, I think, helped protect the Jasper brand and in a lot of ways enhanced it. So as Patty's mentioned, it was clear that the actions taken by the town and the businesses to enhance their operations in the face of the pandemic was received positively by residents and guests, which is really important. So even with a vaccine on the horizon, there's a long path ahead to return to the pre-COVID tourism activity in 2024 is what a lot of the forecasts are projecting right now. There's opportunity to provide a safer environment, protect the Jasper brand, enhance the visitor experience, attract new guests, and increase economic activity in the community. And I think that second last one was interesting for us in terms of some of the feedback we heard from the visitors. There's a lot of regional traffic, and particularly southern Alberta, I think, that made its way to Jasper this summer and hadn't been before, or maybe hadn't been in a long time. And we had a lot of positive feedback that it was a great experience, and I think the outdoor patios added to that. And again, I truly believe a lot of this all kind of culminates to something that's really important, to protecting that Jasper brand and the expectation of experience in Jasper. So being a bit more specific in terms of the economic and the social impact, you know, ourselves and several of our peers, it was fairly obvious. There was direct jobs created as a result of these extensions. I was really pleased to hear from some of the neighboring retailers that they felt there was some direct benefit on their businesses because of the activity and just the people sitting around looking in through store windows and whatnot for their businesses. I can speak firsthand for ourselves, and I think this is also true for a number of the businesses that were able to participate in the program, that it certainly contributed to their viability and their ability to meet their financial obligations as they go into the winter, slower winter season here. And it's also important to notice, I think, to a degree, some of those those jobs that were created and the patios were extended, they aren't there anymore as we get into the winter season, and they no longer have that extra seating. So I believe this will be shared with council in a bit more specifics with all the detail as Patty will do with all the information she's collected. But Tourism Jasper did a short 3-question survey that they sent out. This one was guest facing, so not to businesses per se, but just to look at it from a visitor's experience. So in addition to the positive and constructive feedback that Patty collected on behalf of the chamber, Tourism Jasper received positive responses from their guest-facing survey, with over 94% in favor of patios becoming a permanent part of the Jasper experience. And again, as I said before, I was especially pleased to hear some of the positive feedback about how that related to restaurants, or sorry, to retailers. So again, there's opportunity to provide a safer environment, protect the Jasper brand, the visitor experience, and again, hopefully attract new guests, because it's definitely something they enjoyed, as you can see here. And we still have some opportunity, because there's some people that look like that didn't actually make it to Jasper this summer, but they seem to be interested in answering the survey. So going forward, again, I want to thank town and the council for the urgency in getting this project going. But we knew that because it happened so fast, it would not be perfect. We want to thank the Chamber and Tourism Jasper for their diligence in collecting that feedback. Because as a result of that, I think there's evident opportunity to improve the project going forward. It's also worth recognizing that Jasper is aligned with changes made by other communities around North America, some even permanent, notably Banff, Toronto, Vancouver, and New York's permanent outdoor dining program. So definitely in line with what's happening in a lot of other parts of the world. So to be, I guess, specific on what some of the thoughts we are and how this can maybe be improved going into next year, I should know that businesses rely on the expertise within the town administration to build the policy framework. They're the experts in this. We as business owners are not. And so then, yeah, that said, we do want to offer some recommendations with respect to the opportunities we see for improvements going to next year. So the first being that I think there's opportunity to explore a fee structure. So charge the businesses for the use of the space. Because in the end, you know, the broader community needs to be able to benefit from this, this change. Looking at space allocation, I think there's some opportunity to build a policy that maximizes the ability for participation by businesses. And specific to that, maybe consider provisions for use of neighboring frontage where there's permission. So if someone maybe can't use the space directly, the parking space directly in front of their business, but their neighbor isn't using it, maybe there's some opportunity to build a policy for that to happen. I think to a degree that was already something that happened last year, but just maybe building the framework and making it a bit more clear so that there's wider participation. And then I think town should also consider minor infrastructure changes for locations that have, you know, small like planters and whatnot that maybe could be moved. And again, I think it's important that that's at the expense of the businesses. Just so, again, we can have more participation and increase the available space to do it. Looking at what happened last year, or sorry, this summer, I should say, with the bulk of the extensions being with those barriered spaces out on the parking spots. I think town could consider this year to provide two options, a bit more formally, where you saw the one where there's the boardwalk around, and just based on whatever's best given that specific location. And again, I just think this will allow more businesses to look at it as an opportunity and hopefully participate. So Patty mentioned timelines. I think this is a really critical piece that we look at this, and I guess in my point here, a time frame in terms of when it begins and when it ends. And there's a lot of talk motif and design elements, and some of the feedback that Patty's collected certainly speaks to that. But I think it's really important that council looks at that and balances the length of the commitment to the potential project, if they do allow it to go forward, with the capital investment that's associated with that. If it's going to be a 5-year program, I think a lot of businesses will be, for example, a 5-year program, that's just an example. I think they'll be in a position to spend a fair bit more capital than if it's something that's on a year-to-year basis. So just really please take that into consideration, the capital component of the infrastructure. Just as, you know, one small example, let's say for our patio at Jasper Brewing, I think we were around $3,500 for those cement barriers, and with the other additional stuff, we came into about, you know, around $10,000 for the setup. So just to give you some ideas of the quantums, but I think that's something that really needs to be taken into consideration. And then I think, as Patty had said, we could look at something maybe from the Victoria Day weekend through until Thanksgiving, and also maybe just contemplate what some special event closures around the holidays and stuff could look like. I think that might enhance the program. And then specific to those design standards, as I'd mentioned, I think it's important that we balance those against the length of the program because of the capital costs. One thing I think that really could be added to the project, potential project this year, would be something in conjunction with Parks Canada, some kind of an expedited or streamlined building permit process for anyone that wants to put any tents up. There's some real safety concerns with them, and I think there was a bit of lack of clarity last year of that concern, but also how to address it properly. I understand there is one of the local businesses that worked with a local engineer actually to address it. So I think there's if there was some thought and effort put into that, there could be a real easy sort of streamlined process to ensure that it's absolutely safe, at the same time that it's something that businesses could get through without too much expense for engineers and whatnot. So I think that's something that should be really looked at in conjunction with Parks Canada, of course. And so in closing, thank you, I thank council and for the opportunity to provide these perspectives and the input. We ask that above all, the council addresses this with continued urgency. We again did our best to draft a motion. We asked council to consider something to the effect of direct administration to prepare and present a recommendation with stakeholders to council to continue to permit the use of Jasper street side parking for businesses to offer their products and services, such that a decision can be made prior to the end of 2020. So thank you for everything, and I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Ireland. Questions from councillors? Councillor Journeau.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Ireland. In the page 5 of your document that was provided for us in the agenda, there's a paragraph or portion on the right-hand side that refers to numbers, and the percentages and the numbers were left blank, and I was hoping that you'd be able to give us those numbers in your oral presentation. So it says, though total vehicle volumes through the park gates were only down, and number of businesses. So could you expand on that, please? Provide that information.
Yeah, Mr. Jones, we were hoping to have that specific data that wasn't just sort of anecdotal or rough estimates. And I didn't feel comfortable that we had data that was, I guess, reference from something that I could share that I feel comfortable with. So I think part of the point was I think there was a lot of traffic through town, and I don't know that it changed, or sorry, through the park, say relative to normal years. But I think it's important that we maybe didn't see the same amount of that translate into business activity. But and the jobs numbers there, again, we did speak with the local, trying to remember their acronym right now, but the employment office. And again, the numbers, I just wasn't able to pull a specific number out that I felt sharing or comfortable sharing.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Journeau, and the response, Mr. Ireland. Mrs. Pavlov, you wanted to add to that discussion, I think.
Yes, Mayor Ireland, I did want to indicate that I am working with local bylaw to determine if they have any statistics at all on traffic in the town site. I do have statistics on the way from Parks Canada, which I'm trying to interpret down into a reasonable amount. We did obviously have lesser traffic through the gates this summer. However, we still saw well over 1 million visitors. And just to reiterate, with Whistler Campground now scheduled to open just shortly after Victoria Day weekend, we anticipate that the need for extra services, or at least have accessible services to accommodate shoppers for groceries, for gas, for food, for retail, and any other attractions that they may choose to visit, that will see an increase. And so the need, as far as the chamber is concerned, and that's, again, everybody I've spoken to, it is very important that this project be able to continue now into what may look like a more normal season with Whistler opening.
Thank you, Mrs. Pavlov. Other questions from councillors? Councillor Wilson.
I guess more of a comment. I definitely like the direction this is going. I really hope that we can approve something very similar to last year, but then build off of it. I just don't want to get tied up with, or businesses get tied up with shooting too far. Shooting for too much. You know, I'd like to see a lot more additions to the patio seating, but I'd also like to work with businesses to ensure that you can plan for what happened last year right away. You know, like we don't want to tie it up with a whole bunch of other changes. I think businesses need to be able to know that what we did last year, you can do. Hopefully we can do more. But I'd like to see that happen quickly so you guys can plan for it, and then, you know, build upon it in months, years to come. But definitely want to kind of start with a head start of for the coming year too.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any other questions or comments from council? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Mr. Ireland, for your presentation. Once again, your input has been valuable from the beginning of this conversation. I have two questions. The first is relative to your specific request, where I read you're requesting that council continue to permit the use of parking for businesses to offer products and services. Are you making that request with respect to the presumption that we will have another year, another season dealing with COVID? And therefore, is your request around the coming year, or is your request for a decision relative to ongoing business beyond what we assume will be another COVID season? So short term or long term?
Well, we personally, like our business, I think it's anyone's guess to a degree as to what next summer is going to look like. We are planning that there's going to be some impacts on our business for sure, whether that's, you know, the 2 meter rule or not. But I think just no matter what, we're expecting to be a non-normal summer again next summer, hopefully better than this one. So I guess first I would say is hopefully for at least for next summer, but I think that's really up for council to determine what's the best for the town. I don't know that I'm in a position to say whether 1, 3, 5 permanent. I just don't feel like I'm in a position to say that. I think I'm just trying to provide the perspective that it was beneficial for the businesses and, in my view, a net benefit for the community. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, it does, because you said that I think your focus here and for the decision that you're asking us to make in a relatively short term is around the presumption of another non-normal summer. And that is a context that I think I'm prepared to push for a fairly early decision, as opposed to something that would be ongoing or more of a permanent nature. My second question is, and forgive me if it seems like a challenging one, but it is a question around concerns that I have heard, and that is around the difficulty that some businesses face, where those businesses that happen to have a fairly long length of direct street ground floor presence are in a position to benefit quite significantly. Other businesses, they may be on a second floor, they may be located in a mall area and therefore not have street frontage available to them really, or they may be very small and, for example, situated where there is a bulb or a crosswalk, these kind of areas, which really make it far more difficult for them to take advantage of this. And I wonder if you have had any thoughts, if you have any ideas of how a program, be it short-term or long-term, could be, you know, made a little more accessible to businesses of different configurations. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
Okay, so actually, just real quickly, with respect to your first question, I just wanted to add that I think, you know, it was interesting this year that the project went ahead, and I think there was a lot of opportunity to see what worked, and maybe there's some opportunity for improvement. So I would just add that I think in terms of the length of maybe asked for this project, I would just add that mainly I just want to focus on if it's going to be a longer project or longer potential timeframe that we can keep doing this, that the capital investment to any motif standards can be higher. That was my main point in terms of the number of months. So with respect to the second question, that's challenging, because I feel strongly that the more that the structure can be, or the permitting can be built, so more businesses can participate, the better. That's a similar challenge that Banff's facing too, right? With a lot of even additionally second floor commercial space. So I don't know, other than I guess to say two things. The more that there can be access to space, the better, because I think that's obviously going to improve the amount of available businesses that participate. And then the second point I would make, which would get definitely controversial, is whether town wants to consider to look at maybe a bit more of a broader project, as I talked about in the spring, with looking at maybe some laneway closures. But that gets into a whole nother topic that I don't think is my place to get into. Those are my thoughts, to be honest with you. So
Sure, well, fine. Thank you very much. And maybe not your place to make a decision, but certainly your place to express an opinion. So I appreciate it. And thanks very much again for your helpful presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thanks again for your presentation. There's no doubt that the program was a success, and I think it should continue. The question that I have, and it's a question that has come up from many of the residents, is around the design standard, or the motif, as we call it. The majority of the residents would certainly prefer a pedestrian walkabout or walk around or whatever. The second part about a pedestrian walk around is that it makes it easier for non-restaurants, in other words, clothing retailers, whatever, to develop a secure area in front of their store so that they could participate as well. So I see it growing in that respect, but I would also like to see some consistency on the design motif. And from the feedback that I get, the pedestrian walkabout, of which one business participated in this summer, is definitely favored. I'm wondering what your feedback on that is.
Yeah, I think that, Mr. No, pardon me. I think that's a great way to look at it. As I'd suggested, at this point, maybe the best way to do it going forward would be to provide both options. That being said, certainly in motif like Jasper's, that's one of its wonderful attributes. It's got a pretty attractive downtown core, so definitely don't want to move away from that. So at this point, I say for our business, we last summer going into it, we'd actually purchased all the wood to start building a boardwalk around it. I think it was, if I remember, around $10,000 or so. So it was a pretty decent expense, and I think you'd want to maybe build it in a way that you could like easily pick it up and move it and bring it back again if we were to do it again another summer. So definitely a bit more cost, but yeah, there's some benefits to it. The other thing that I think is important that might get a little tricky is when we looked at the design itself, if you've got alignment and support from your neighbors that aren't doing are doing a pedestrian walkway, you really want to have some consistency with how that's built. So say, for example, in front of Jasper Brewing, if we were to do the pedestrian walkway boardwalk, if you have that angle in again within that space, just in front of Jasper Brewing, you actually lose a lot of space because you have to move it in and out. Whereas if you were to have that extended, you gain a lot of space. So it's just something to think about. I don't know what the best answer is. And again, if you've got several in a row that are creating this longer boardwalk, I think that'd be pretty cool and wonderful. But at this point, maybe, as I suggested, maybe just to allow both options. But if it's a longer program and it can be bigger and more consistent, that'd be great too. If that answers your question.
Thank you. May I have a follow-up, please?
Yes, Councillor Journeau, please continue.
The comments that we received from the residents was the fact that it became difficult to social distance in the case of the pandemic. So that was one of the feedbacks I think has to be considered. And the other one was around people who smoke. They were right in the middle of it, as opposed to the comment, what the people felt that if you had to walk around sidewalk, that would alleviate that difficulty. So I'm just passing that on basically, but just to let you know that the residents certainly prefer the walkabout, and from a motif appearance, it would probably be preferable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Thank you, Mr. Ireland, for your presentation. I just have a question. Mrs. Pavlov mentioned in her presentation that servers had concerns about crossing the sidewalk. With the brewing pub, you had both. What is your feedback on that?
We didn't hear a lot of feedback from our guests on that. I suppose, to be honest, I'd have to reflect it. I'm not an expert on that health perspective. Certainly we spent a lot of time interacting with AHS and the local health inspector, and that when you think of most restaurant operations, there's many circumstances, even with the 2-meter separation of the tables, where food is moving within, fairly close proximity and stuff. So that's something that's come up in industry association conversations. And I think I gotta be careful, because again, I'm not an expert on this, but my perspective, for what it's worth, is just, I think it's something that's noticed and opinions provided. I'm not sure that aligns with necessarily an expert's opinion. So I don't feel like I'm in a position to answer that anymore. That we didn't have any issues with it ourselves, I could say.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, can I just add one comment to what Bert just said?
Of course.
I think it's worth noting as well, this doesn't apply to our business, but there's some locations in town where you'd have to be taken into consideration that there's multiple entryways, say on the business side, where if you were to not have the patios out on the street side space, that might inhibit, movement in and out of those doors. If it would kind of almost have to force it to go through the patio, or else you just couldn't have a patio there at all. So I don't dislike the idea. I just think I really feel strongly that whatever plans put forward is structured in a way that as many businesses as possible can participate. So I would suggest to maybe take that into consideration.
Thank you all. If there aren't other questions from councillors, I have a couple. Firstly, Mr. Ireland, with respect to the proposed motion, you've given us some sample wording for a motion, and I really do appreciate that you have used the phrase that whatever we do would be for businesses to offer their products and services. Predominantly, perhaps exclusively, the opportunity has been picked up in this previous summer season by restaurants, but the intent from the outset was that any business could do that. And I'm interested to know, through you and Mrs. Pavlov, if you're able as well, you could provide comments. But have you discussed with others in particularly the retail sector, whether there might be incentives which would allow them to draw some of their business out onto the sidewalk or into to the adjacent parking lane, so that we can have more people share in the opportunity rather than limited, as it seems to have been, to the restaurant sector?
Patty, do you want me to go first? Yeah, I'll just, a couple of thoughts I can pass. I did hear, and to be honest, some of this was from retailers and BAMP more than anything, but that if they're moving their products, like say it's clothing out front, having a tent to protect it from rain and whatnot was really important. So again, circling back to, I think that would be something to consider. And I don't know that this is something that someone would invest in necessarily in Jasper or not, but I know there was some instances where for retail space, there's limited numbers of people they can have into their retail space just because of the density from COVID variable. But some even put small waiting areas and stuff. Maybe that could work for service-based businesses. I don't know exactly, because there's capital costs and has to make sense for the business model. But if you had a hairdresser that wanted to have a waiting space that was outside, I don't know what that would look like, but it might even be attractive to bring more guests in. So those would just be my comments I have. I don't know any of you on that. Patty, I'll let you answer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mrs. Pavlov?
Yes, if I can just follow that up, please, Mayor Ireland. When I was discussing the opportunities, the perception was that there was opportunity, but it wasn't necessarily something that would benefit retail. When I went back and did this report here in early November, there was definitely some feelings toward being able to adjust retail sales to accommodate. I know that the example set by some of the patios included sharing that space during the day and then into the afternoon and evening. There was some discussion with some retailers that they would be able to work with the hospitalities that had the actual sidewalk seating or patio parking seating, parking spot seating. And I know that the appetite is there to discuss it, and we would be happy to work with any businesses who have questions or concerns on the logistics of it. Again, a lot of the ones that don't have street access do have other access to parking behind their buildings. There is some parking lot availability, that type of thing. We had the one instance where the business believed that the patio seating was going to be very detrimental and may result in their closure. But that was one that, again, we could probably work with and have no problem. I should qualify all of this by saying it matters not if you're a chamber member or not. In this instance, we are here to assist the entire business community with working through the logistics of this project.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Ireland, my last question for you, again, just in terms of the proposed motion. It is interesting and quite specific in that it would direct, or you would have us direct administration to prepare and present a recommendation with stakeholders. So are you anticipating that the process here would be for us to release administration to work out details with stakeholders, whoever those might be, and then we would get a joint recommendation at the end of the day? And I ask that because I'm trying to think how this process can unfold most quickly so that we can get to a decision early. And if it is a joint recommendation that we are looking for, that's that would be very interesting. It's a little bit unusual, but it's something that we could certainly grapple with. But I'm just wondering whether you have thought how that process might unfold within the timelines that appear to be recommended.
Okay, well, my language in that suggestion motion is probably not the best. It's definitely not my area of expertise. But in my mind, I think it lands with the town administration. They're the experts in how to build these policies and understand the safety and all those kind of variables. So I think we've seen there's some great feedback that Patty's collected and Tourism Jasper's collected. So I think of just taking that all into consideration. And ultimately, I think the town administration has to be one that compiles it all together to a recommendation for council to look at. But and then the other stakeholder part, I think Parks Canada has to be involved in at the very least for that 10 component. But yeah, maybe just collecting that. And ultimately, I think that the town is in my view, they're the experts that can bring a recommendation to this group.
All right, thank you for that. Are there other questions for Mr. Ireland? If not, thank you again for your presentation. Very helpful for us as we continue with our deliberations. And I would then next invite, is it Mr. Greathead? Are you presenting the third bit of this presentation?
Yes, Your Worship. Good morning, Mayor and Council. From the administration point of view, there were numerous concerns that were raised. So I'm just going to go through my report on this. In response to the limitations that were affecting businesses, Council was approached to extend the sidewalk seating. Administration then developed a plan to increase the seating by allowing seating on the sidewalks themselves and having a walk around and a boardwalk. We were really concerned about the first off, the physical separations that were required by AHS, so that way we could keep the pedestrians flowing, and then as well as maximizing the opportunity for business to increase their space. And you know, we understand that this was a critical year, and you know, some of the survival of the businesses depended on the changes that were allowed and permitted by council. So once we had designed the walk around, that was presented, and then council was again approached due to the cost and to vary the boardwalks that were planned by administration, and they wanted to be set out into the parking spots. So when we talked to our insurers and our risk management experts. They said that those would need to be armored because people would be sitting in next to the live lane of traffic, often with their backs turned to the flow of traffic, and be unaware. So for the patron safety, the blocks that were used were required. That was just how it had to happen. Now so that was allowed, and then what we ended up finding though was quite often there was the sidewalks were bookended, so there was seating up adjacent to right in front of the businesses, and then there was a 6-foot area that was allowed for a walk through, and then more seating on into the parking spot. So what happened was it created a pinch point. Administration, operations, particularly bylaw, and AHS as well, all received numerous complaints about the pinch points that were presented and that invariably crept up. We noticed many times that there were pedestrians would see another group of pedestrians walking towards them, and people were kind of unsure what to do because it was very constricted. And we noticed so many times that people were just walking around into the live lane of traffic to get around the sidewalk seating. So that was a common occurrence and a frequent complaint that we received. So having said that, we have been paying attention during this project the entire time, trying to review it, how we would do it better. Again, some of the concerns that we noticed, the aesthetics this year, the concrete blocks, they were multicolored. There was no standardization of approach. We had numerous complaints and concerns, and just saying that, this was not befitting of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And that's something that we had heard often. Again, there was mention of the smokers. So the smokers would be, and I'm one of the smokers, but they would be gathered at the bookends kind of the patio seating, and using the spots in between parked vehicles as their smoking area. So that's another concern. And then it was actually encouraging clusters of people that further affected and pinched down and restricted the walk through. So again, administration's really wanting to go back to a boardwalk and a standardized approach. We noticed that there's some health and safety issues, and as was cited, where the servers were going back and forth to serve patrons across the walkway. So our ideals were to, when we came up with this plan, was to increase the physical separation, so the and improve the pedestrianization of the downtown. And I think we need to do some improvements on those aspects. So some of the recommendations there that we would have as we go forward with this is that we understand that there's a large cost, so we would suggest that maybe we can extend this and go for a 5-year term on this plan. That way we can come up with a standardized approach that they all look consistent, that the walkarounds, or however it's determined what we're going to do, is aesthetically pleasing, that there's a motif that we follow. And I think the sidewalk seating has the potential to actually enhance the look and the vibe of the town, and I think we just missed the mark this year. And then I think the permitting should be adjusted. Some of the walkarounds, the permits, a lot of investment and a lot of staff time, and increased liabilities, and all the other things that for the allowance of this program. But some of our permits, we would only recover $200 per application. So when we do have other businesses that if they had extended a full-time or permanent patio, they would have to buy those parking spots, and that fits in with their parking bylaw. But So some businesses were saying that, well, I had to put in a $7,700 fee to put in my boardwalk. And if I hadn't known this project was going on, I would have had a temporary sidewalk seating. So there's some concerns that we still need to work through on this. But I do see room for improvement. I think the ideal and the goal was great. You know, very much personally in support of it. It just needs to be done better, in my opinion. So I think that if we were able to come up with a standardized plan, go back to that, we do need to get this in front of PDAC in a very short order if we're going to have this approved by spring. So we don't have, you know, months to spend on this. We've got to come up with a plan very, very quickly. And that's it for my report.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Any questions or comments from councillors with respect to administration's report? Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greathead. A lot of what I'm hearing, both from the Chamber, from Mr. Ireland, and from our municipal administration, leads me to feel very inclined for revisiting the original intention back in the spring. We were unsure of how businesses would receive a closure of Patricia Street on the west side of Connaught. And we were a little hesitant to cause any harm or any undue harm on top of the realities of COVID and what COVID was dealing to our local businesses. But the points of accessibility, of equity, and of aesthetics and a common motif do make me feel inclined to consider this a little bit more broadly and to come up with a plan in preparation for the summer of 2021 with, you know, if there's tour companies and senior citizens that we need to consider, let's start these conversations. Let's engage the professionals that would have recommendations on how we move through this to still meet the demands of our local businesses and residents, but while making sure that safety remains our utmost priority. And Mrs. Toop's report that she sent to us maybe a month and a half ago was really well done. She's a professional in the field of planning, and for increased pedestrianization is ultimately the goal here. We want businesses to definitely do well as well. And with all of the permitting in mind, with all of the parking, the liabilities, as Mr. Greathead mentioned, I would be in favor of supporting a 5-year project term, or maybe a 3 to 5 year project term to make the duration solid so that we can navigate it. And I would suggest that we should revisit the broader goal of pedestrianization of the downtown. Places like Central Park in New York City did it, and it's been super successful across the globe. And I think it's certainly the way to go during these times.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Other comments or questions for Mr. Greathead? Mr. Greathead, then, in the absence of other questions, I wonder whether you have had an opportunity to look at which of the concerns that you've noted might be addressed simply through management tools rather than, say, infrastructure changes, for example. And I mean, there are notations about smokers loitering in the bypasses. That seems to me that we have bylaws in place. That's more of a management issue than a design issue, I would have thought. Similarly with patrons lining up, and whether that's management by the business establishment or bylaw, perhaps is irrelevant. But it seems to me that rather than necessarily change the design to eliminate some of these concerns, there is a management component, and we could perhaps address it from that perspective to solve some of these problems. Has any consideration been given to what tools or resources would be required to simply better manage what happens on the sidewalks?
Your worship, I think it would come down to our enforcement kind of, in involving the bylaw department. But as you know, we're light on the staffing component with the bylaw. And usually, it's in the later evening when our staff isn't on shift that these kind of conditions, it's the bar crowd, that, out for a few drinks at the end of the day, that were, the pinch points of the smokers that were there. We also had increased complaints from businesses that weren't participating in the program, and certain businesses were upset with the placement of the garbage cans because of the sidewalk seating, and why should that business end up with a garbage can in front of them when they don't have a sidewalk? There's an awful lot of the component, and I think the biggest hardship that we had as administration is the fact that there wasn't a standardized approach. So it was pretty much, each business would develop their own plan, and then we would be reviewed by bylaw to make sure that, and AHS to make sure that we had the separations that were required. And that was pretty much all our approval tools that we used this year. So again, I think there's an awful lot that can be improved with the program. But as for the management, I don't see how the town could have done any better, given what we tried to accomplish in a very short order this year. So I'm looking at the list, Your Worship, and I just don't see that there's anything more to really have done.
No, I appreciate those comments, and it's not necessarily that management would have to be the responsibility of administration or the municipality, but just as we require businesses to shovel snow off their sidewalk, it seems to me that we could impose management requirements that say you have to manage lineups, you have to manage smokers, you have to manage what goes on that sidewalk to ensure that pedestrians have some capability of transversing the sidewalk. And so I'm not suggesting that it should be just the issue of bylaw, but it could be more generally recognition that there are management responsibilities that go with this opportunity, and allow the businesses then to manage the space that they get to use in a different way. It's just, I'm just suggesting that there might be management tools rather than design changes that are required. But I thank you for your comments. Councillor Wilson, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, it seems to me we're in it seems to me that space is like more space is necessary to resolve quite a few of these issues that Mr. Great had brought up. And I think we might be in a good situation here. Maybe we don't have to commit to the the same thing as last year, but maybe we don't have to commit to something for years to come. Maybe we try out something else. I could easily get behind Councillor McGrath's suggestion that we do a pedestrian Patricia Street for a certain amount of hours a day, or maybe throughout the summer. Maybe we do close down one lane of Connaught, but maybe that's just 1 year, and we trial that, and we say, you know what, that worked, or you know what, that wasn't as good as the first year of COVID. But we're kind of maybe it's time to just try a few things out before we land on exactly what we want. And if we do these closures of laneways or lanes, then maybe it's not as big of an investment for businesses. They don't have to build the expensive walkarounds. We have closed lanes that they can operate in, and it just spread people out. We're into another year of COVID. Maybe we try that one out and come back next year in November and discuss that trial run and see where we want to go from there. But I just don't think we're going to figure it all out in time to give the businesses enough time to operate. So I find that'd be a pretty fun trial run as well.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor McGrath.
If I may, I'd like to weigh in on the management of smoking, and I don't believe that it is an administration subject. I think it's a bylaw issue, and we have a bylaw, and it states that you shouldn't smoke within 5 meters of any designated doorway or window, and that simply doesn't exist in the downtown core. You can't smoke on a sidewalk and be further than 5 meters away from any door or any window. As we debated this in the cannabis smoking debates years back, I think it needs to be revisited. The smoking bylaw as a whole in Jasper should be considered by council as a public health question.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Keller-Harempy, and then Councillor Journeau.
I agree that we need to continue the pilot project for 2021. However, I don't agree with Councillor Wilson. We have heard clearly from our businesses, both on Connaught and Patricia Street this past year, they did not want street closures. I can see closing maybe a lane, but to close them down totally to pedestrian only, I think will affect many businesses. On Patricia Street alone, we have a grocery store. We have a business stop that is in tariffs and everywhere where buses stop that come in from JPL and everywhere else. And if, according to that vaccine is coming, we will hopefully have some international travel next year. I would not be in favor of closing streets down. I think our businesses this year made it very clear they would agree with the Canmore model, but they certainly street closures.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harempy. Councillor Journeau.
Again, I would like to commend the administration and probably bylaws and mostly shouldered that duty was the response in which they acted on this project with all the pressures from the various businesses and so on and so forth. I think Mr. Gray had alluded to that a bit, the fact that they had to move very quickly from all angles. And I think I was quite pleased with the way our administration responded and provided a great product in the end. Yes, we have to tweak it, but my comment now is about the good response that administration provided to this effort. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Journeau, and I fully concur. Administration and bylaw did a wonderful job. And as you indicated, Mr. Greathead, a lot of it was one-off. Each individual business was dealt with, and accommodations were found, made life, I'm sure, extremely difficult for your crew and for bylaw, but you did an exemplary job. And I think the comments from Mr. Ireland about the impact that administration had in a positive way are credit to you and the entire staff. So thank you very much. And I thank Councillor Journeau for raising that. Anything else for Mr. Greathead at this time? All right, if not, thank you for that report, Mr. Greathead. It too will inform our further discussions. We are now completed agenda item 4. It is 10:51. I'm going to suggest that this might be an opportune time for a 9-minute recess, and we can reconvene at 11 a.m. with agenda item 5, business arising. Us back to order with agenda item 5. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes? That would be either the minutes of November 3rd, the regular meeting, or November 10th, the special meeting. Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. My question is for administration, being that we did discuss the World Tree on November 3rd. Has administration been in contact with the World Tree representatives, as I tried my best to bring it up as a representative of the community's voices, and I wasn't able to achieve anything with last week. And I'm fearful now that as time goes on, it could leave the project not moving ahead.
I see your hand there, Councillor Wilson. There was a question though for for administration, so I'll let Mr. Greathead answer first.
Your worship, to Councillor McGrath's query there, no, we haven't been engaged with the World Tree. We're available to work with them, but we haven't heard anything. So, and truthfully, we were unclear on the direction to take at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
I had been in touch with Trouty from the World Tree, and it is going forward this year with the volunteers that are putting it together. They do have trees selected, and they've been recruiting me to assist. But so I don't think we have to be fearful that it's not happening this year. With my discussion with Trouty, it is, and hopefully the municipality and Parks is already assisting with allowing the tree to be removed from the compound. So it is happening. I think the plan is for a lighting on December 4th, and if the tree gets there in time. So that's the tentative plan. And yeah. So anyway, I think if there's any talk about taking over the tree, I think it would be in years to come, not currently, because it sounds like they're pushing forward on it anyway. But for Mr. Greathead, I could probably be in touch with you, but and I'll just let maybe Trouty Gola get in touch with you as well to plan for the delivery of the tree.
Councillor Wilson, we have been approached previously in the past. Usually they email about a week to 10 days beforehand when they need the assistance from ops to make sure that we get the tree ring ready and help out with the lights and the extension cords and power and stuff like that. So usually that's typically what happens, and I expect that to happen. And when we do get the request, we'll be there to help.
Yeah, and even further, I guess Gord Hutton, I think, is Penny, I think, is part of the group as well, like his wife. So I think Gord might be more than no as well. So we'll move forward with it as soon as we can, I guess.
Thank you all for that. Mr. Greathead, is there any expectation that we would not, as a municipal organization, be able to accommodate the World Tree to the same extent that we've done so in past years?
Your worship, my understanding is it's, since I've been here anyways, it's the World Tree group that Trouty and those that make the effort, and we're pretty much just in a support role and do what we can to help out. That's how it's been presented to me, and that's how it's been going for the last 2 years anyways.
Yes, I understand that. Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that there is nothing unusual about this year that would prevent administration from offering the level of support that's been offered in previous years.
No, sir, we're ready.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other business arising? All right, I can move to agenda item 6, department reports. We have nothing scheduled. If I don't see a wave from Mr. Greathead, I will assume that is the way it remains. And go to agenda item 7, which is bylaws, and there is just a summary available for information, no action required. Which takes us to agenda item 8.1, reserves contribution information. And Mrs. Melanchuk, I presume.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Your Worship and Council. As asked of administration at the past meeting, at past two meetings, it was discussed about the reserves being presented and what portion of each budget they would contribute to. So as you can see, because we've been relating everything to 2019, I put down what 2019 figures were, and those transfers to reserves, as well as what administration would be considering going off of the 2019 figures with the initial conversations that we've had with council. So that is just based off of that initial number that we've been talking about, and not the other figure that administration would like to present in giving that they need to have to ensure their success in going forward with asset management. So this is just that portion, keeping at that 2019 level. So you can see in 2021, it's just over $1 million that is part and parcel going to the capital reserves in the tax portion of the budget. And then just over as well, 1.1 million that is going to the utility base part of the budget. And that shows also just over that 500,000 that council had alluded to in reserve contributions at past meeting. And that was for information sake going into the budget conversations coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Questions from councillors regarding the reserves? Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Mrs. Melanchuk, thank you very much for this information. I was the one that posed the question, and this is very helpful for me to contextualize budget conversations as we go forward. I think I just have one question, and it's to confirm my understanding. I'm always struggling a little to understand the separation and the conjoining of our operational budget with our capital budget. So if we look at the 2019 year, and we generated almost $1.5 million in transfers to reserves, with the proviso that not all of those reserves are necessarily fully capital in nature. Most of them are. So is it fair to say that in 2019, that $1.485 million is the total contribution from the tax base and utilities base into the capital budget? So there's no other monies from taxes or utilities going into our capital budget. So in a given year, all of the capital budget items that council might approve are either coming from that allocation in that year of almost $1.5 million, or from grants or other funding. Is that correct? Like, we have no line items directed toward the capital budget other than transfers to reserves. Is that correct?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Butler, yes, this is correct. The capital items that are paid for at the end of through the end of the year are paid from these reserve accounts. So there is a balance sitting in those reserves. This is the amount that is transferred to those reserves in that given year. And then also, as you alluded to, yes, grants as well as debentures, say.
Right. Okay, good. That's really helpful. I really appreciate that information. I know all of those numbers we've probably seen before, but I find it really helpful to see them all on one page and presented like that. I did have, if I may, one other small question. The wording in these various lines, some of them say transfers to restricted reserves, some of them say transfer to restricted, some of them say transfers to restricted funds, some of them say transfers to reserves without the word restricted there. There's no particular significance to that. They're all reserves of various sorts, some more restricted than others, but they're all just reserves, and I needn't really pay much attention to the difference in wording. The important part is the departmental wording: bylaw, fire, library. Is that also correct?
Your worship, through to Councillor Butler, yes, I have been working at renaming all of the GL accounts, however, haven't gotten to all of them. So we've been working on the operating side, and we will eventually get to them all, but it is just the inconsistencies that have occurred over the years in naming process.
Sure, and I have no problem with it. I just wanted to confirm my understanding, and it's clear enough to me. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Butler, and those responses, Mrs. Melanchuk. Are there any other questions about the reserves? If not, we can move to agenda item 9, a request for direction regarding utility fees. And Mr. Greathead, are you leading us through that?
Yes, Your Worship. I will, but I will also ask Ms. Melanchuk to assist where needed. I just also want to say that I really appreciate the effort that was put into developing this report and the different scenarios. You know, that was very labor intensive. So again, really want to recognize Vidal Michaud, utilities manager, Christine, and Natasha for helping us get this through, or to this point anyways. So right now, the report's in front of you. We have gone through and presented different scenarios, as you'll see in this report, and different options that are available, and the rationale for choosing different methodologies and ways of building a rate structure. So as we've gone through here, we've been looking at the comparatives or comparable communities within Alberta, and we've highlighted some of them. If you look on page 3 of the report, the bottom graphic or table that's there, showing the contribution to reserves by the community and population. So Jasper, we have a population of 4664. Our total levy for our utilities is $2.8 million. And out of that, we put through $371,000 to reserves. Banff has a little less than double our population at 8385. Their utility rates, their total levy is $7.4 million, and they end up putting $3.1 million a year towards reserve. In Canmore, they have a population of 14,911. Their total levy on utilities is $10 million, and out of that, the transfer to reserves is just over $2 million per year. So administration and the utilities department, we're looking at the age of our infrastructure, and it's getting at that age where we really need to seriously start looking at replacement. And the long-term plan would be to rehab and replace the existing infrastructure. And we need to be able to build up sufficient reserves to be able to go and start this planning and the redevelopment of our utilities. So we've alluded to in the past that we figure that this would be about an 18-year plan to, by the time we ever start this project, to replace all the utilities and end up with new asphalt, new roads and sidewalks as we're going about it. So there's an awful lot of work to be done that we really are unable to approach at this point. So It's just part of us being able to future-proof the town as we go through. So there's on page 5, I believe it is, and 6, there are different base rates by meter sizes, and is the first one, and then so that just gives the rationale and the kind of a standard approach on how most municipalities charge out for their base rate. So the base rates to cover key staff and make sure that we are funding our utility department appropriately. And then we're going on, there's been some questions asked. I know that I have said that I lean towards a tiered system where the heavy users pay more for the infrastructure. Council has indicated that they prefer a more of a flatter approach. So you have options available for your decision on where we should go and what type of reserves that you would like to see. So Ms. Melanchuk on the final page of the presentation has listed down what the levies would be and the rates to our capital, to our reserves, so we can do the capital renewal and reinvestment into our system. So you'll see, 3 option ones, and that's your flat system. And then if we go to the consumption-based model, options 2A through 2E have different rates depending on where council would like to approach this from. So the information's there. If there's anything that is unclear, Ms. Melanchuk and I would be able to speak to those items.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Questions from councillors? I can perhaps begin then. Mr. Greathead, on the first of the charts, it is page 27 of 68 on my agenda. I don't know what page it is of your report, but it begins base rate by meter size. Can you tell me what the current rate is? And I take it it's not differentiated between meter size, but just for a comparable, our starting point is what interests me. And is it you have water base 13, sewer base 18. That line, is that the status quo?
Your worship, currently we have no base rate. So it's just a
okay.
A straight off consumption-based metering.
All right, so the 1B option, the flat rate, or 1A, I suppose, what is equivalent to what we have today, if any?
Currently, we are sitting at the 1A model.
Okay. Thank you. I see no hands up, but I see intent on the face of many councillors looking at the graph. So I'm anticipating questions momentarily. I will say, Mr. Greathead, that through the last discussion on this and rereading the report, and again in today's agenda and the report, you have satisfied me at least that the tiered system makes sense, coupled with the conservation model that you propose and a tiered rate. I wasn't comfortable with the change in rate for types of user, but the tiered rate, I think, makes good sense. And I appreciate all the work you've done on this, and credit your staff. But it comes together now with me, and I will say that you have convinced at least one among us that there is merit to the tiered rate. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Your Worship. And you know, as a group of us working on this problem from the administration side, we've really enjoyed the discussion up to this point, and we've been paying attention the whole time to make sure that we try and get this perfect.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Greathead, to you and your team for bringing this forward in such an organized fashion. I'm curious, just for some clarification, the option difference between 1A and 1B, let's say, for example, and the additional revenue of $1 million being achieved is simply the difference of charging $1.71 a square or a cubic meter versus $1.41 a cubic meter. Is that the only change in 1B?
Yes, Councillor McGrath, that's correct. The sewer rate is also increased by another 30 cents on 1B model.
Councillor Butler.
Thanks, and thank you, Mr. Greathead and Mrs. Malinchuk, for all the work. This is a big decision and it's a complex issue, and I appreciate all the efforts. I am going to need to ask some questions to help me understand. To some extent, I'm going to need to be walked through this. So looking at the first of the 2 pages, utility rate review, base rate by meter size, I see option 1A, and I see bolded in dark blue, additional revenue per annum of $529,000. So I don't really understand what we mean by additional revenue. Additional revenue over what? Additional to what? Because I think I heard you say, Mr. Greathead, to Mayor Ireland that represents the status quo. And if so, then why is there additional revenue? If that's the status quo, I assume there isn't additional revenue. So could we start by just clarifying what I'm not understanding there?
Your Worship, to speak to you about the question, that would be the incorporation of having a base rate. Right now, we do not have a base rate. So if we have a base rate for all the accounts, that will drive that number there.
All right, great. So adding the concept of a base rate depending on meter size and doing nothing more can generate about $500,000 per year. And then 1B, we increase the flat rate for consumption, and likewise in number C, option 1C, we're increasing, well, there we're increasing both the base. Got it.
Yes.
Sorry for my struggle. Now I see it. So I have a question then, and it is this: could you help me to understand, either sort of notionally or through some data, how much of our, as we operate now, about what proportion of our utility billings, and I'm talking about water and sewer here, would come from the small meters, which I take to be largely individual residential customers, the 5/8 and 3/4. I'm trying to get an idea of what is the quantum of water and sewer billings in a given year now that come from the small individual, largely residential users versus the larger users that would be affected if we went to either or both base rate, a tiered base rate or a tiered water rate. Because I would assume that we have many more of the smaller users than we do of the larger users. So I'd like to understand about what proportion of our billings come from the little guys versus those that come, the billings that come from the bigger ones. Anyone have an idea on that off the top of your head?
Go ahead, Mr. Greathead.
Your worship, thanks for Zoom technology. I am having text right now with Ms. Malinchuk, and we can get that information. I don't have it readily handy for this discussion right now, but Utilities Manager Vidal has just said that 68% of our water use is tied to commercial business. So that would mean a residential is 32%.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to both Ms. Malinchuk and Mr. Greathead, because we just covered the report by Ms. Malinchuk on restricted reserves or reserve contributions, sorry, in 2019. And then we go to page 3 of Mr. Greathead's report, and you have a historical transfer to reserves data. I would think those numbers should be similar. There should be able to pick one from the other. They don't seem to add up. We're both talking about reserves, and yet the numbers are entirely different for 2019. So wondering why that is.
Worship through to Councillor Journeau, if I may.
Yes.
It's funny because I changed this again at the last time I put the report through, but it didn't stick again. I'm not sure why. When we're talking about reserves for Jasper, the amount of 371 is for water and sewer alone. So if you take 2020, for example, and you look at 318.85 and 68.72, that's just for water and sewer, as we're discussing that with this report.
But should those same numbers not be included in the report you just provided? If we look at 2019, for example, the numbers transfers to restricted utilities, water, sandy transfer, whatever. The total is, approximately 550. But yet, the numbers are not similar in 2019. So I guess my question is going back to your report, Ms. Malinchuk, I assume the 2019 column was the accumulated transfers to date. In other words, the balance position of these transfers. Now it appears it is not. So do we have a position where what's in totally in reserves? I was guessing this was a total in reserves, but now I'm thinking that it's the amount that we transferred to reserves in those years. Can you clarify that, please?
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Journeau. If you look at the transfer to reserves in 2019, you have 2 line items there. There's water transfer to restricted reserves for utilities, and then there's also a fleet one for CAP Auto. So 301,525 under 2019 and a 10,529. And then if you look back down to the historical transfer to reserves data, for example, you can see $312,054. So it is
Okay, thank you.
it is the annual transfer to reserves, not the amount that is in the reserve account.
Okay, so are we going to be provided with the amount that's in reserve accounts in a report that's forthcoming?
Your worship, through to Councillor Journeau, I can provide that. I provide it every year, but I can provide an updated one as well,
Thank you.
if it's a wish of council. Thank you.
Yes. I see Councillor McGrath, but let's clear this up for Mrs. Melanchuk now. In the normal course, when would you be providing us that information about the cumulative amount of our reserves?
Your worship, I normally provide that information early in the season to go over what has been transferred in, as well as what has been transferred out within the year that we went through. For example, it would have been January or February that I would have presented a report saying this is how much went into capitals transfers, and so the amount that was contributed to the accounts and the amount that went out towards capital purchases in that year as well. So I can definitely provide, and why I provided at that time is because it basically will give you the balance going forward into the next year.
In terms of workload, what is required to give us the current status of those accounts now? Recognizing that you're in the middle of preparing a budget, I'm not sure whether this is part of it or not.
Workload, it is not a heavy workload. I can prepare it, no problem.
Okay, thank you. So with that additional information, Councillor Journeau made a request for the balance of our reserve accounts, the cumulative total of reserve accounts at this time. Is that a request of council for that information? I see 2 nods, 3.
I don't object, but it doesn't help me to make a decision. I think the annual presentation of that information is adequate, since you're asking.
Yes, we do need to direct staff with a whole of council approach. Not that we have to be unanimous, but I'd like to know where people stand. I tend to agree with Councillor Butler. It might be interesting, although Mrs. Melanchuk, on the basis of your statement that it is not a significant amount of work to produce that, if councillors will find that, any councillor will find that interesting or helpful, I don't want to stand in the way of that. So I'm inclined to accept Councillor Journeau's request and support it. And I think that is sufficient. It's quorum, so I would ask that you prepare that information for us. And then I think I had a hand up, and now I've lost track, but I think Councillor McGrath.
I just have a general question for administration. Mr. Greathead, would it be correct to assume that a 5/8 inch and a 3/4 inch meter, is that residential, or would it get into residential with the 1 inch and 1.5 inch as well?
Your worship, to Councilor McGrath's question, yeah, the 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters, those are the smaller meters, so they would be in your single family homes and duplexes. Once you get into a larger size, smaller apartment buildings, fourplexes and such, then you'll get into the 1 inch water meter size. But the residential is the 5/8 and 3/4 predominantly.
Thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Mr. Greathead, on the second page of many tables. So this is utility rate review, base rate by meter size, base and tiered. And for that matter, also on the first page, in every option block For tier 4, I understand that we're looking at a user using over 500 cubes in a, I guess that's in a 2-month billing cycle. But then that breaks into 2 lines. And I can't make any sense of the numbers in those 2 lines. For example, in the first block, it ends in 12,900, but then the second line is 14.1. In option 2C, there's a huge difference. 21,000, which I would take to be an annual billing for that very large user, but then an option that says 65. So I don't understand what those 2 lines are. And I also don't really understand the numbers under the column that says change. We see in option 2C, the change in the first instance is $3,500. In the second column, the change is $10,800, which is the same as the 2-month billing cycle. So I'm just really confused about, honestly, what those numbers mean.
Ms. Malchuk, Tash, you there? Are you able to speak to that one?
Yes, Mr. Greathead, I can, so if I am to go over, for instance, option 1C, and to give you an idea of those 2 boxes at the bottom. So there is a calculation that's based off of a 2-inch meter, but then there's also a calculation based off of the 3-inch meter.
Got it.
And the other question, can you repeat that, please?
Well, it was the same question, say, looking at the option 2 series, 2D, sorry, 2C, looking at those same boxes, I see $9,300 being the 2021 2-month billing cycle. And I see that change. Those change numbers, the change number looks the same as the 2021 2-month billing cycle. So I just don't understand what those numbers mean. So I'm looking at option 2C, those last 2 lines again.
Your worship, through to Councillor Butler, I must say you are very, very observant, and that was tied into a wrong cell. It was a blank cell, so I will have to change that. I'll highlight to change that equation. Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the reason it doesn't look to me like it makes sense is that it doesn't, so.
You are correct.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so then my last question along this line is then, in each of these options that I'm looking at, I see over to the right, for every option, additional revenue that could be generated, and I assume that is additional revenue over the status quo. I want to understand a little bit about where that number comes from. So if I look at option 2, 2D, say, I understand that over in the far right, the annual billing numbers would represent a sample of what a user using that size of connection and that amount of water would pay. Is that right? Can you confirm that? So a user with the smallest connection using up to 35 meters a year would pay, a cycle would pay $584 a year, right?
Sorry, I was looking for my mute button. Yes, so annually the change would be $584. So that would be and that's based off of that 20 meters. So that would, if that person or that building accumulated that or used that much water in every 2 billing cycles, then that's what they would see charged additionally in a year.
Okay, so given that those annual sample billings, then I assume you've done some sort of extension where you've taken the number of users that use about that amount of water and the number of users that would be tier 4, which I can't think there would be very many of, and added them all up based on assumptions of how much water they're using to get us to the $3.4 million of additional revenue you would anticipate. So I can't add up the numbers in the annual column because each of them would have a certain number of users using about that amount of water. So I'd have to multiply them by the number of users using about that number of water. And through the complexities of that, I'd end up with the additional $3.4 million, right?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
There's no one else. When we're looking, Mr. Greathead, under all of these scenarios, when you are looking at both meters, connection size and consumption, I want to think of an example. Let's think of an example of a large apartment building, which has probably 1 meter, 1 connection, but probably has, let's say 60 residents. So that apartment building might have a 2-inch connection. So would be paying accordingly for the consumption. And that connection would also have 50 households worth of water flowing through it. And so then that connection could be subject to tier 3 consumption rates. Am I correct in that?
Your worship, to the question on the floor, yes, Mr. Butler, you're correct. That would be, and that would be typical of how it works for most of the commercial apartment buildings and such.
Well, let's say residential apartment buildings, in the sense that they are residential, and that's where I'm getting at. And this is my hesitation, and this isn't a question, it's just a comment, but this is my hesitation in moving to a tiered consumption system. I struggle with the idea that that is a conservation system, because certainly it incents large users conserve, but some of those large users are representative of a large number of small users, whether they are small apartments or whether they are individual tourist rooms. So I still struggle with the idea of tiered usage charges, tiered consumption charges. It's attractive. I can easily see the numbers we can generate by going that route, but I struggle with the equity side of it when some of those users are simply an accumulation of small users. And I'm more comfortable with, I might be more comfortable with an even more aggressive base rate scaling than what is shown here, because at least then the base rate scaling for larger connections can be distributed among many users, whereas the large water fee will affect the many users serviced by that larger connection. So I'm still struggling with the idea of a tiered consumption charge. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Greathead.
Your worship, if I can just add to this, so say there, hypothetically, there is a 60-unit apartment building, and it's 1 meter that goes through, and the landlord has the responsibility of maintaining the building. So a toilet having a silent leak that you wouldn't even notice, that's leaking internally, just say the flapper valve doesn't seat properly, that can chew up almost 100 cubic meters in a day. So there's an incentive by having a bill that is tiered. There's an incentive on property owners to maintain their system and just not allow wastefulness. If we don't fix a reasonable value on our water, there's no incentive for anyone to do any better. So like it can be seen as, you know, kind of cherry picking or, you know, targeting a certain sector. But at the end of the day, the intent is that if you're using a lot of water, if you're using a lot of water, if you're wasting a lot of water, you know what, you're going to pay for it. At the end of the day, there's a responsibility on all of us to do whatever we can for conservation. So that's why we're leaning towards the tiered system, and it puts the onus on the property owners to make sure that their systems are not just wantonly wasting. For a variable, or if I, you know, and I'm to give council more flexibility or some different options to consider, we can always move these tiers. These tier blocks are kind of based on what your average family would use, and then, you know, what a smaller commercial business would use, and it's scaled up in the tiers, you know, trying to address the demographics of the properties in the town. So that's where those models, that's where our model has come up from. But again, that's it. This is all, you know, to the will of council, and just to remind council that they have the flexibility to change those tiers or those rates. This is just a proposal from administration at this point that we're working through.
Yeah, and thank you. And I really appreciate that. And of course, the decision and debate needs to be among council, and I certainly don't mean to sit here and debate with you, but I am expressing a concern I have about maybe an unforeseen impact of going with a tiered consumption model. But thank you for your perspective on it. I certainly understand it.
Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Through you, Mayor Ireland, to Mr. Greathead, on the tiered system when it comes to apartment buildings, residential apartment building, that would be tier 3, am I correct?
Everybody on if we go to a tiered system, everybody's going to be charged the same rate. So your first 30 cubic meters or 35 cubic meters that's used would get charged at the low rate, and then from 36 cubic meters to 100 cubic meters, based on our model, it would be charged at the next rate. So even if a small household went through 500 cubic meters or 600 cubic meters, they would be charged at all the different tiers. So okay. your first 35 is your cheapest in the tiered system, and then it creeps up from there. And further, if I can just add, we're looking at roughly 20-25 cents per tier, but that each tier is 1,000 liters. So that's each cubic meter is 1,000 liters. So it is a significant volume of water that we are talking about.
So right now we charge 121 per cubic feet, am I right?
For water, that's correct.
And sewer?
I believe it's 232 per cubic meter is the sewer rate.
Yep.
Sorry, I see you, Councillor Junot, but I did have a question that I wanted to get out, and I'll come right back to you. Mr. Greathead, this goes back to my earlier comment about the conservation model that you have come up with, and Councillor Butler's recognized concern, and I appreciate that. Apart from what you said with respect to that model, it seems to me that the tiered rate may in fact drive something like an apartment building owner or a hotel owner to invest in, say, low flow shower heads or low flow toilets, maybe even different landscaping that is less water intensive, in addition to just maintaining the integrity of the system. But my question is, to the extent that the model works, that it is a conservation model and drives less use, to what extent have you factored that in to the revenue calculations? Because if we go to a base system with tiered billing, one of the intents is that people will use less. They'll be incentivized to use less. If they use less, we will make more. Has that been factored in at all in your numbers? I rather gather that the numbers that are presented are based on a continuation of volumes that we have seen rather than volumes that we might anticipate if we disincentivize high use.
Your worship, I think that the actual impact that we would notice overall would be somewhat negligible the first year on the flow of water. And I think it would have to adapt year over year. It's not, we won't see an instant shift. We would be having an awful lot more engagement with the residents when they're saying, well, my water bill went up by this much. We do have the ability on most of our water meters, the radio meters anyways. They'll tell us if there's a constant leak or if there's an intermittent leak. And that's something that we can help the homeowners with. And so it will take a long time before we actually see any noticeable significant changes in our revenue structure. But having said that, any loss in the water that and shortfalls that we may have, we're saving it on the back end. Right now, it's costing us almost, well, just to run the wastewater plant. It costs us quite a bit of money to treat that wastewater. So the less water being used, the less wastewater. So I don't know how to describe, what a revenue model would look like in a year. I know that when I was previously in Fox Creek, we introduced a water conservation model in that municipality. And it really, we had quite a few people that would, homeowners would say, my bill's too high. They'd go out, they'd fix the toilet. But overall, on the scope of a municipality, it's going to be negligible.
Right. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is, it's not a question, it's more of a comment. So it kind of encapsulates a bit of the comments that have been made by Councillor Butler and yourself, Mr. Mayor, and the comments that have been made by Mr. Greathead. If we go to this tiered model, the councillors are going to be the ones that are going to be mostly responsible for the selling of this. And I'm wondering if before we go through the implementation, there might be more cooperation, collaboration with the users to explain to them from what the concerns are. So you've alluded to some of the concerns about the fact that a certain apartment block compared to the next apartment block uses way more water. So we assume that it's leaks or lack of water saving facilities. So would we, without having to bring up any names or any properties, would there be an effort being made by administration or, I guess it would have to be administration, to meet with these people and saying, okay, this is what we're proposing. This is how it's going to affect you. And then they can implement some water saving measures sooner. I'm not trying to cop out of us councillors being responsible to sell this. I'm not at all. But to me, we lack information here to really present the picture to especially the large users, what the picture really is. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Greathead.
That's a good one, councillors. Trying to think how we would be able to walk through this one. And I understand that there's the concern. There's also the urgency on administration to make sure we get this in a timely fashion so we can put this into effect for the coming year. I think there's some other options that we can do administratively, and given council's direction, we could always have, say, the first billing period that goes out showing at the new rate, but only charge at the old rate for the first billing cycle. And that would give people an understanding of, I need to change my practices. Some of the larger users, you know, they go through a significant amount of water. And, you know, I'm sure that it would be, you know, very, very difficult for them to you know, adjust and make the changes. You know, but I also, you know, I'm looking at it the other way as well, where we go to some of the hotel rooms and they say, you know, please conserve water, please recycle your towels and reuse your towels. But, you know, there's, you know, the rooms are still being rented out at a very, very high rate, regardless of what we're paying for the water. And I think the water is going to be the cheapest portion of any business's operation model.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
I understand that we have to take care of our infrastructure. I understand we have to change how we're doing things. I'm very concerned this year to bring in a tier model. Hotels, even though some of them did okay over the summer, there were less rates. A lot of businesses are down. We cut the taxes last year. We plan to put them back up this year. I'm really concerned about bringing in the tier model and utilities skyrocketing for both our residents and our businesses. And I don't know whether I, as a resident, will see a big difference. I have one bathroom, but to bring this in, I like the idea of bringing in the rate, the base rate for utilities, and to set a rate for the water and see how it goes this year. I get the idea of the tiered rate, but I do have a lot of concerns implementing this year.
Thank you. Anything else for Mr. Greathead? Mr. Greathead, the request for direction does not give a direction date. What is the date by which we will need to provide direction so that the utility fee bylaw can be ready for the year?
Ms. Melchuk, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm just opening up my calendar now. I just noticed that was put in that way. As we're going into budget presentations next week on the 23rd and 25th, we can discuss the options going into those meetings. When we're looking at an actual decision for utility rates, would probably be prior to the December 15th meeting, as I'll have to come back for first and second reading in order to have third reading on the first meeting of January. As we need it to go out as notice and advertisement to the ratepayers then, and my utilities manager needs that number by that Tuesday, those numbers by that Tuesday. So ideally before December 15th, and we can rewrite that onto the request for decision and bring it forward and have more discussions going forward into the next month.
Right, so as long as someone recognizes that a date is essential in this discussion, and so we will have to come to a conclusion and get it back before us for a determination so the bylaw can be developed. I don't know what other time council may need for discussion. I would be content to see first reading of a bylaw at our next meeting. I'm comfortable that we have covered all of the information that I need to hear, but I can't speak for all. But I think we should plan to have this back before us and get the process underway to get to a bylaw in time for next year. If council is comfortable leaving it with that, I can move. Is any closing comments, particularly on timing? Councillor Butler.
I like the idea of using tiering to create a conservation model, tiering of consumption. But I'm uncomfortable with what I see as an inequity in the way what essentially amounts to a penalty for, let's say, that running toilet. Because if we tier the consumption rates, it seems to me that a careless apartment dweller who leaves their toilet running will, in the end, pay a lot more, or the collective group who live in the building will pay a lot more for that running toilet, because collectively that apartment building is a high consumer. So that apartment dweller who is careless and leaves their toilet running is going to pay more than a single family home owner who maybe has 5 toilets and uses as an individual user quite a bit more water. But because he is overall a smaller connection and a lower user, he's penalized less. So I find it hard to see how in the end it really is incentivizing everyone to fix their leaking toilet. So I could get my head around a tiered system if we could find a way of tiering it in a way that affected individual residents equitably, where we could maybe tier it based on the concept of individual users, whether they be apartment dwellers, condo dwellers, single family home owners, rather than simply tiering it based on the consumption attributed to a particular building or complex. So I'm wondering if there's some thinking that could be applied on those lines. So if an apartment building has 60 residents, 60 residential units, then it is charged as a 60 resident complex, and tiering could be based on the per resident usage rather than the overall usage, which I feel is punitive to people who of necessity or choice actually live small in smaller spaces and with probably fewer plumbing fixtures. So I'm coming back to that problem I have with, I understand the attractiveness of tiered consumption rates, but the equity there is something I really struggle with. And I'm proposing maybe we could think of it a little differently by considering tiering around individual users rather than collective users like a large hotel or large apartment building. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. And on the tiering model, I've already expressed my generalized support, but in response to concerns expressed by Councillor Kelleher-Empey, I think adopting a tiered model is in principle the way to go, but given the economic reality I'd be inclined to have some further discussion about the rates. I think the rates could all be condensed, but we could get the model in place and then deal with increased rates for different tiers over time. But my concern is if we don't use this opportunity to get the model right, we won't have an opportunity in future to adjust as economic conditions might allow. So again, similar to Councillor Butler, there may be some adjustments that could be made to the tiered model, but to get the thing in place, because in principle, I find it to be the way that we ought to go, and it has all sorts of utility for the future, if you'll excuse the pun. Councillor McGrath, I think I saw your hand, and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I appreciate Councillor Butler's analysis of this and drawing it to, per resident and individual users with affordability and equity in mind. And I really appreciate that, because those of us that are renters in the community, we don't necessarily have control over the maintenance of our units. And we all know that maintenance of rentals in Jasper can always do better. So I, as a renter, wouldn't want to be blamed for my landlords not upkeeping my toilets, let's say, as an example. And I think that there's so many people that would fall victim to that in our community. But I do also think that Mr. Greathead's idea with whatever we decide and whatever model we choose to move in, if we were to keep that first billing cycle as is and demonstrate through the utility newsletter or a method of communication, this is what your next billing cycle will look like with the changes that we've created. It will make it a really clear process, and thank goodness we have a communications person in place now, so that we can have some assistance on the municipal administration side of really making sure that the communications in whatever model we choose is delivered really effectively.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you very much. We were presented today with 8 options, and as Councillor Butler noted, there were some areas that have to be fixed up. Based on today's discussion, can we narrow these options down to a lower number so that we can study this better? Is there any thoughts to that at this point by administration, or there's a lot of information for us in those options that we're not going to use. So I'm saying, is there a way to eliminate some of them so that we can be easy for us to study and work with and explain to the public from a cell point of view as to what we're trying to accomplish? Because right now it's overwhelming for me. So if there's any way to narrow the data down, I would appreciate it.
Go ahead, Mr. Greathead.
Your worship, to Mr. Journeau's question, absolutely. This has been a pretty good work through to get to this point. We're paying attention, we're listening, we're trying to do the best we can, for council to make a decision. So, it would be ideal if council would say, can you run the numbers and work option 1B and 2C out? If that would help to narrow it down. And again, they suggested rate tiers, the actual physical money per tier, that's council's discretion. So we can even have that it's pretty much straight across and linear. And where our rate blocks, we can reduce those as council sees fit. So administration's looking towards council to help us refine this as well. So we can do it, and we can get there. It's just knowing which way council wants us to point on this. So we need council's help on this too.
Well, I will go out on a limb then and suggest that if there is concurrence on the base rate, so adding a base rate, that produces additional revenue of just over $500,000. And that would have been based on a flat rate for consumption. If we take any one of the options with proposed revenue streams and can agree on one, so I would suggest perhaps we start with option 1B, so about $1 million, and then take a tiered rate that produces that result. So a base rate plus some tiering, plug in whatever numbers are necessary with an eye to the total revenue to transfer to reserves. And if it was about $1 million for this year, then we've started, and over time we have then a model that can be adapted to generate transfers to reserves, knowing full well that the entire infrastructure is going to have to be replaced at some point, and we'll need money to do that. But at least it gives us a model with much lower numbers, but something that you can plug in the gaps and get us started. I'm only suggesting that low end from model 1B, I think it was, with the $1 million, but it need not be that. But that's the kind of direction that I would be inclined to give, so you can come back with a model that reaches that sort of objective. Councillor Butler?
Yeah, I'm thinking, thanks for that, along the same lines to Councillor Journeau's suggestion that we eliminate options. If we're talking about what we could do this year under current economic conditions, I think we would have to limit ourselves to something that looks like model 1A or 1B or 2A. And it would seem to me that we could consider models that look like those. They generate something up to $1 million in a first year. Two of those models don't use tiered consumption charges. One of them does. It gives us further option to kick that ball around, what we think about tiered consumption options. And as to what we could consider in a first year, I would be comfortable leaving those three options on the table for further discussion, eliminating the others as being not necessarily untenable, but maybe untenable this year. And that might step us toward our goal of making a decision. So that's refinement of what I think I heard you suggesting, Mr. Ireland.
Yes. Councillor McGrath?
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I would support a further reduction of options being exactly in line with what you mentioned, either 1B or 2A, bringing in roughly $1 million of additional revenue for the municipality to put into reserves for upgrades of the facilities.
Does that give you a go forward, Mr. Greathead?
Yes, Your Worship, it does. Thank you, Council. We'll be back next week.
Thank you for that. All right. Requests for decision. I am optimistic that we can move through at least the first two fairly quickly. 10.1, Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater Partnership. Mr. Greathead, would you address first, please, the request for waiver of notice?
Yes, Council. We discussed this on November 10th, and we do need a short turnaround on this memorandum of agreement so that we can apply for the Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater Partnership grants that are available. So that's the first item that we need.
All right, Councillor McGrath.
I can make a motion to move that council waive the necessary 2-week notice to see this item.
All right, There is a motion from Councillor McGrath that council waive the 2-week public notice period otherwise required to make a decision on the Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater Partnership funding application at today's meeting. Any discussion? All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And if you carry on then, Mr. Greathead, with the whatever you might say about the main motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this municipal water wastewater partnership, it can cover up to 44% of some of our project costs based on our population. Now, some of the items that we need to or want to address in the near future, we've replaced the centrifuge at the wastewater treatment plant that spins the water out of the biosolids, and it reduces our weight and is kind of the Kickstarter of the decomposition process of that. So that's we have our contracted operator working right now to get the project charter sorted out for that, and we're building up our applications. So with this wastewater partnership, we just need the signature of the mayor on this document, and then we will be making our applications.
Thank you. Discussions from council? Mr. Greathead, the funding would give us 44% of the project cost. Do we know the project cost?
Your Worship, the centrifuge alone, we're looking at about $2.5 to $3 million as a ballpark right now. The centrifuge that is currently at the wastewater plant was put in 2003, and it is undersized for our flows. And it's mainly because we do have the seasonal impact of the tourism sector. So it's surging. Our volume surge drastically, as much as 2,000 cubic meters per day, depending on what's going on in the town. So that's one. Another, we're looking at upgrading the control and SCADA system for our water treatment system and our distribution system. We're also looking at doing capital water meter upgrades of $250,000 and the residential water meter upgrades of about $600,000. So these are all projects that align with where we need to go and why we've asked for the increase in our utility rates to be in these initiatives. And this grant would definitely help us meet those objectives.
Thank you. Any councillor prepared to make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. The motion then in line with the recommendation in the report that council support a funding application to the Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater Partnership for water supply, water treatment, and wastewater treatment capital projects for the municipality of Jasper, as outlined in the report that we received today. Any discussion on that motion? I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Greathead. We also have a request for decision, the ICIP grant, also with a waiver of notice. And Mr. Greathead, is that you or is that Mrs. Melanchuk?
That can be me. It's we're requesting a waiver again of notice. There has been discussions in council September 1st, October 6th, and November 10th of 2020. And this is the Investing in Canada's Infrastructure program. And we need a signature on the grant agreement. And this money is used for the curling club and the rink, the ice slab replacement at the curling club. So to avail or to make yourselves available for this funding, you need this MOU signed by the mayor and myself as soon as we can.
All right, so the first procedural matter then is waiver of notice. And what is the deadline to get this agreement signed?
Your worship, I'm looking, I don't see the deadline, but I believe it's imminent. I believe it has to be done by the end of the year. I'm just not finding it right at this moment.
I just note that the agenda has contemplated waiver of notice. It seems to me that this has been before us. I wasn't sure that we needed waiver of notice, but if council is content, if notice is required, I'm certainly prepared to entertain a motion now to waive that notice. Councillor Journeau?
Also make that motion.
All right,
Motion is to waive.
I have a motion then from Councillor Journeau that council waive the 2-week public notice period, otherwise required to make a decision on the ICIP grant agreement at today's meeting. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. At 2 previous meetings where this has come up, I've raised the question, and I believe it was supported by council, of the impact of signing this agreement where some portions of the projects encompassed by this grant application have not been approved by council, and some portions, in fact, when we last talked about them many months ago, received some resistance from council. And I was hoping to, I believe that administration was going to look into that and help me to understand the degree of commitment to those projects that we would be undertaking if we go ahead and sign this grant application. So I would like an answer to that question before we proceed with the motion.
So, Mr. Greathead, to you or through you to Mrs. Melanchuk.
Tash, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Greathead, and through Your Worship, through to Councillor Butler, I was unable to receive that information for this date. Therefore, as I stated before, it is up to council on whether or not you would like to sign it now. The grant advisors have been emailing me to have it signed. I do not know the answer to whether or not the application can be changed to accommodate other projects or whatnot. So unfortunately, I do not have that answer at this moment.
Right, thank you. Asked and answered.
Before us still is simply the motion to waive. We can come back to the merits, and I do have some questions that I am going to pose or some comments. But just with respect to whether or not we can deal with this at today's meeting, there is a motion on the floor. So I will call that question, and that is specifically a motion to waive notice to deal with the matter today. All in favor? Opposed? There are 2 opposed. That is carried. On the substantive issue, and although I appreciate there's not yet a motion before us, but there is a recommendation that we sign the agreement. I have spent some time reading the agreement. There is opportunity to change the contract. Section 5 deals with changes to the project. The project itself has received consent from Canada and Alberta, and there is a schedule attached which defines the project. And to Councillor Butler's question, what parts of the scope of that project, and that is on page 55 of 68 of our agenda, are troublesome. So I know there is the project which has received at least tentative approval or is identified is listed in that. And so if there are significant matters where we think that is not within scope, we ought to deal with those. Councillor Wilson?
I would point out a new elevator between floors would eat up a fair amount of the money that is probably not, you know, one of the top priorities that we need to be looking at. I just feel like Councillor Butler, I think threw a whole bunch of things on a list, hoping that they'd get taken care of, and without knowing that we can modify them. The question was asked not last week, but I think the week even prior. It's pretty straight. I don't. Where can we get that answer, and who are we waiting for it from?
Mr. Gray, are you or through you to administration able to answer that? I appreciate Mrs. Belinchuk has indicated she's been attempting to speak to grant advisors without any apparent success.
I'm hesitant, Your Worship, at this point to offer. I'm catching up to speed on this as I'm looking at it. I understand the concern of council with this one. Can we get back to you within a week for the next meeting? I don't want to defer this at all, as Ms. Melanchuk was saying, that they're the grant providers have been hounding us. They are looking for us to sign this agreement, and we can, if I given time, I can get into this and get back to you.
Thank you for that, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I agree with the concerns expressed by other councillors. With other grants in the municipality of Jasper, when we have them before us, we have an opportunity to debate the grant and debate the likelihood of, say, increased work for the organization with each grant and how it applies to the workforce and the organization as a whole. And I believe that every item on this grant should have been deliberated, debated, and approved by council prior to moving this far into a grant process. But I certainly don't want to be someone that stands in the way of us receiving grants for capital assets to be maintained and upgraded. So it's quite tricky right now. I think that council did express the desire to see all grants in its initial stages in previous years. And I think that maybe that's how we got in this situation. And if we could revisit the policy that we created to ensure that any grants moving forward are seen by council prior to moving this far.
Councillor Butler?
Yeah, Ireland, where did you say that you read that there was a provision for alterations or changes to the scope of the project?
Section 5 of the agreement simply covers it, changes to project, and simply has us acknowledging and agreeing that material changes require consent of Alberta and Canada. It's on page, right at the bottom of page 7 of 23 of the agreement.
I see it
So
now.
there is some provision, but it's not up to us. But it's, if that is a material change, we can certainly seek consent to change, but it's a very minimal provision in an otherwise very lengthy contract. And then the project itself is defined several times, and then there is a specific schedule appended which outlines exactly what the project is, which has been approved. And I do note that on there, project objectives and results refers in part to barrier-free access. And so I wonder to what extent accessibility for all might factor into the elevator question, for example. And that could be a determining issue from Canada or Alberta as to whether or not the matter proceeds. So I agree that more certainty before we sign the contract would be helpful from my perspective. Councillor Butler.
No, I didn't have my hand up. I had nothing for
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Chernow. I looked at the wrong screen. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Echoing the comments made by previous councillors, you know, some of the items on the list here are projects that are already underway, for example, the slab and boards. But I think that, again, council should be deciding specifically on each one of these. We've spent a lot of money in recreation, and I know that we have to spend a lot of money in other areas. Some of these here are basically considered modernization, maybe convenience in some cases. So I fully in agreement with the other councillors that these items should be received basically a review by council and approved on a one-by-one basis. I also think that these items should be labeled with an amount, a specific amount besides each one. And for example, I see here a multi-purpose hall update. To me, that's not definitive enough for me to say yes or no. I support Councillor Wilson about, you know, the elevator upgrade, or to be anything to do with the basement of the activity center. I think the activities that have been there in the past are of the past. I don't think they'll be moving forward with COVID, so on and so forth. So I think we have to discuss this. We have priorities elsewhere. You know, we just talked about water and sewage treatment plant, and our streets are certainly in need of upgrades. So I echo Councillor Butler, who opened the discussion on this matter. I realize we're supposed to be applying for all the grants, but I think that if we can't direct these funds to other projects that may be more priority, it's difficult for me. Thank you.
Councillor Butler, I recognize you, but Mr. Greathead had his hand up. And did you want to respond to Councillor Chernow before I go to another councillor?
Your worship, no, I'm just listening at this point. Ms. Malinchuk has just been trying to get your attention.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mrs. Malinchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Through your worship, through to council. Another week, I can just continue to try to contact the grant advisors and get the answers that you're searching for. No problem. It's just another week. So they have emailed me looking for the signature, but honestly, I think that given the reservations we might as well wait and see what the grant advisor says. And I did not see that part in the agreement, so that sounds like a good thing. However, I do want to allude to that there were it was for culture and recreation, this grant, so it wasn't applicable to other areas. It was for the culture and recreation division. We have been talking about these projects for many, many years in phases. So that's why it was brought by administration to apply for it. Remember, it was a couple of years that we've been working through this grant process. And in my training, as I was brought on, I was supposed to be doing these grant applications, and some are conditional to have council approval prior to applying. Like you've seen ahead of this, that we have to have a letter from council going into the application process for the wastewater treatment plant renovations. However, that was not a condition of this grant application. But all in all, being said, if there's reservations, let's I can keep on calling and hopefully get through and have an answer for council for next week.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Melchuk. Councillor Butler and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. So as the primary stick in the mud on this, I'm prepared to unstick a little, because we can't take the risk of not getting the money. We can't make a decision next week anyway. That puts it 2 weeks. Administration has a lot on the go. And I think the point has been made. Ms. Melchuk is entirely right. This was applied for under a program for culture and recreation. However, it was one of several programs available to apply under, and other communities applied for some of this grant money for things like wastewater treatment plants. My objection has, and I think was, and I think we're all pretty clear on it, that applying for large grants for particular projects is a question of strategic priority for the community. The directive that I think we have issued, if not specifically through motion, but through clarity of communication, has been that in future we would like administration to discuss grant programs prior to submission rather than after submission. But I know that that direction was given after this grant was submitted. This grant was submitted early in my tenure as council. But I think it's really important to make the point that a consideration of whether to spend a lot of money, for example, on our ice arena versus other priorities within the community, such as a skate park or infrastructure like water and wastewater, is a question of priority. And that is a question where council is duty bound to make decisions. And in this case, I feel we weren't afforded that opportunity. However, to stick on it is to really be crying over spilled milk, because the grant application was done, and it was done in good faith. And I don't want to take the risk of losing the potential. So with the conversation that we've had, I'm prepared to support the motion, because the risk is too great to potentially lose funding or be seen as obstructive to the process by the funders. So having raised my objections and voiced them and expressed my disappointment at having not received some answer, I am nonetheless prepared to support this motion, because we have to move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Are you prepared to make the motion? Because at this point,
No.
we don't have a...
No.
All right, Councillor, I think I had Councillor Wilson next and then Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Ireland. And I do agree with you, Councillor Butler. We definitely can't stand in the way of getting this this grant. And thank you, Mrs. Melchuk, for pointing out that it is to be spent on recreation facilities, renovation and upgrade. So we are kind of bound by those parameters, but I could definitely not get behind developing the basement over allocating monies towards the skate park. The basement doesn't serve as many users as a skate park would, and that falls right within these parameters. And I'm disappointed that I don't see money allocated towards a development such as that. An elevator will eat up massive amounts of money to develop a basement that's not even used currently. So I'm not, again, still not behind that, but I definitely do not want to stand in the way. I'm just disappointed that some of our recreation priorities, or to me, my priorities aren't represented here. And I think we can spend that money in a lot better places than some of the items that are on the project description. But again, I'd fall in line with Councillor Butler. Not happy about it, but I really hope that we can modify where these monies go. And I look forward to that conversation, but we definitely have to sign and get that money as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler and Councillor Wilson. I am very aligned with the way that you feel as this moved forward. And thank you, Councillor Butler, for drawing the attention to the fact that this grant was initiated at the very start of our term, before the policy came about council seeing grants. I also thank administration for doing all of the work that they've done on this. And I strongly feel as though three of us have just expressed a huge amount of support for something like the skate park. And I wonder where we have an opportunity as councillors to input our priorities for community health into the capital budget plans. As we would love to see this amended to include the skate park. The community of Jasper would love to see a skate park built. This would have been an excellent opportunity to create more community health, which is the center of our strategic priorities, through providing an accessible arena of skateboard park to all of the families and all of the children, youth, and teens in Jasper. So hopefully there can be an amendment eventually added to this grant process, but I, like Councillor Butler and Wilson, do not want to stand in the way of it moving forward.
Thank you for that, Councillor McGrath. We have at least three councillors prepared to support a motion, but no motion to support yet. Councillor Keller-Hempy.
I'm prepared to make the motion to accept this grant, but with a provision that administration look in to see if we can take the elevator out, if that would be allowed, and to designate that money towards the skate park.
Just for clarity, the proposed motion is to authorize the mayor and the CAO to sign and enter into the contract with Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. So I appreciate that we would like to give some additional direction to council or to administration to see whether we can adjust the terms of the project once we sign the contract. But is your motion to authorize the mayor and CAO to sign and enter into the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Rural and Northern Communities Infrastructure Grant Agreement?
Sure.
All right,
then,
thank you. All right, I will then, I thank you for that motion, and I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So thank you, Mrs. Melanchuk in particular, for getting this through. It has been an arduous task over almost exactly 3 years, I think, since this started, but a significant amount of grant funding. But I leave that with those comments from council and Councillor Keller-Hempy, who made the motion. That is, we would ask that administration, when you are finally able to contact the grant advisors, confirm how we may amend the scope of work that is defined in the project to something that meets with council approval and better addresses council priorities. But to go forward, we can sign the contract, but continue those discussions. I wanted to add as well, just some other observations about the contract, and we've agreed to sign it. But there is a requirement that we must follow the communications protocol in Schedule C, and that Schedule C has a number of different protocols. Now that we have a dedicated communications person, I just invite administration to look carefully at those communication provisions, because they bind us in ways that I found a little bit odd, and it's even questionable whether we can discuss the grant in general terms as we're doing right now, and yet remain within the very strict communications guidelines of that agreement. I don't think we'll have a problem going forward, but I want the assurance that administration looks carefully at that. And additionally, there is a tendering issue, and because work has already started, I presume we're already down that road. But again, paragraph 6.1 of the contract is worth reviewing. I think that would be all things that we would do in the ordinary course of business in any event. But again, if we're signing a contract, best that we'd be aware of our obligations. But thank you for that. Mr. Greathead and I can now sign that contract. We are now at 12:45. We don't have too much left. I might propose, with council's indulgence, that we continue through quickly, I hope, to agenda item 15, and then take a lunch break and then reconvene in camera after that. Does that meet with consent of council? All right, so let's push through then. 10.3, COVID-related staff increase in operations. Mr. Greathead, is that you?
Your worship, my regrets that we had missed this being attached to the agenda. Council has all received it via email. Our request right now on this one is we're just looking for support, and we want to hire 3 6-month terms for the position going for operations, so that way we have some coverage. So what's become relevant during the last little while, just in operations alone, we incurred over 300 hours of sick time due to COVID. So it was mandatory isolations and waiting for testing and that. So it really hit us pretty hard during that month. So we understand that we're going to need capacity, and we don't have much depth within our department. So our plan is to hire 3 term employees, and that way we can cross-train them within different facets of the operations. So that way we'll always be able to ensure that we should have coverage, even if COVID happens to hit us hard. The only ones that wouldn't, only section operations that really wouldn't gain from that would be the utility staff, and that's due to the specific nature of their jobs and their training. So we would like to hire 3 terms immediately. The bulk of their wages would be covered by the MOST grant. So 64,900 of the wages would be covered under that. But for the term, we would still have an obligation to those employees were we to hire term employees, and that may carry a cost increase of $32,466.10. And that's just to make sure that we're able to bridge the gap as we go forward. And thinking worst case scenario that there won't be another program like the MOST grant coming up for next year. So that's the only obligation or concern that we have administratively by hiring these positions.
Thank you for that, Mr. Greathead. This is here by way of notice for decision December 1st. But for the time being, are there questions of councillors for Mr. Greathead or administration? All right, seeing none, I thank you for that. Mr. Greathead, I think it is intended that that come back to us for discussion next week at Committee of the Whole and again for decision on December 1st. That takes us to agenda item 11, correspondence for information, consideration, or action. We have 3 receipts on our, I think on our feedback line about the 4.1 presentation this morning, the sidewalk seating and retail extension program for information. I would add at this time that I have received an additional 6 emails, but through a bit of a cumbersome source. So a business in town, I think, got others to submit to them, who then compiled them and sent them to me. So they haven't come directly to me, and I have to confirm first the release of the information without, so that I don't break any confidences. So I've just been in a bit of a quandary on that, coupled with the fact that they came to my law office email address rather than to me as mayor, which has stalled me in getting some of the information out. But I will share those extra 3 or 6, pardon me, emails with council as soon as I'm clear to do that. 11.2 is a pilot gardening project. We have an attachment with respect to that. And comments or direction from council with respect to that letter, which is it on behalf of the library or just from a member of the library? Councillor McGrath, you can speak to that perhaps.
I'm sorry, I am not actually able to speak to it as I wasn't at the last library board meeting. Based on the letter writer's description here, it looks like it's on behalf of the local food society, but also probably in partnership with the Library and Cultural Center. My question for administration is if council wished to support this, which it absolutely does align with our strategic priorities and how we want to move through the organization and groups. If we were to grant use of the raised beds, how would that happen administratively? Or is there anything that we as council would need to do, or is that simply an administrative procedure?
Your Worship, to speak to Councillor McGrath's question, I believe that this is completely in the administrative realm that we can do this. It's something that upon reading and the presentation by Janine, she's done a great job getting this letter to us. So it's something that we could do. But having said that, it is public space, it is public grounds, and I wouldn't want to just act arbitrarily without the will of council or the intent. And so it's your decision, council. But I think that if there's just a nod of the heads and that this is a program that you can you feel that you're supporting, I think we can make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Councillor Keller-Renty.
This past summer, a youth program planted a number of flowers and vegetables within those raised beds. I'm not sure how that happened, but it looked great. It was absolutely awesome. I've been total support of this. I just think it'd be great for the community.
Anything else from other councillors? Councillor McGrath?
I'd just like to conclude that if it is administration's desire to see how council feels about this, I would certainly support this. The more that we can do to initiate and encourage local programs that do contribute to environmental responsibility, economic and fiscal equity, and social equity is certainly really important to me as a councillor.
It seems to me that there were two requests in the letter. One is to use the grounds of the Library and Cultural Center for education and programming, I think. And we have certainly, well, for the last year, it's over now, I guess, but back for consideration, we've allowed businesses to expand outdoors. If there is a need for the library to expand outdoors, I can't see any reason not to allow them to do that. I'm not even sure that we would necessarily even ask for their permission, but that is part of the request. I don't see a problem with that. Is there any administrative issue with that, Mr. Greathead?
No, Your Worship, I don't see any problems with this. We would want to make sure that these groups that are asking to use our lands, though, would be respectful of the situation we're in. We don't want to have bear attracting vegetables and flowers and fruits and that going on. But as long as they're not animal attractants and they are well maintained, I don't see a problem with it. But I think we should keep an eye on it, that this is not a go forward all the time. If we're not happy with the efforts and say a group is not maintaining the beds that they said that they would, I probably wouldn't want to let them do it again the following year. So I think there's an obligation for groups like this, if they want to use their spaces, to make sure that they uphold the ideals of the municipality.
Thank you for that. Is there any further discussion required then with respect to that particular letter on our agenda, 11.2? I did note that the letter writer was earlier logged in to our session, so hopefully she's heard that, and it sounds to me like there is support within limits from administration, and those matters can carry forward. Takes us to agenda item 12, I think then. Is there any other new business for council today? Agenda item 13, I'm sorry, Councillor. CAO, Mr. Greathead.
I'm sorry, Guy. Just getting updates as we're going right now. The ice will be going at the curling rink, and we'll be starting to chill that slab down December 9th. We have a bit of a hold up with the boards for the arena, and right now we're aiming for a December 16th start. So I'm sorry I didn't get that onto the agenda, but this information is just coming across during the meeting.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, Mr. Greathead, December 16th start, would that be skating start, or was that starting to cool that slab down?
Right now, I think that's the ice in date. So we may be a few days after that.
Okay, thank you.
Right, councillor reports I was on. Are there any reports? If not, I will just very quickly report that I attended both the No Stone Left Alone program at the cemetery on, well, the Friday before Remembrance Day, and the Remembrance Day service that was held outside this year, and my compliments to all involved, the Legion in particular. They hosted a wonderful event. They had to reconfigure because of COVID, but it went off very well, and quite a large residential attendance at that. It was good to see that people came out despite a little bit of cold weather and the change of venue, but credit to the Legion again for hosting a very important day in the community. Upcoming events, we have our public budget sessions next week, which are advertised. Is there anything else upcoming that is worth bringing to the attention of council at this time? If not, then I would entertain a motion that we move in camera at 1:01 p.m. and I anticipate that when we revert to open meeting, there will be nothing that is discussed in camera that will translate into a motion or further public discussion. So for those members of the public who have hung in and watched our proceedings for the last 3.5 hours, I thank you all. You would be welcome to tune in, but I doubt that we will come back in this venue. We will emerge from our in-camera session and most likely go straight to adjournment. So could I have a motion, please, to go in camera at this time? Councillor Keller-Rempe, thank you. All in favor? All right, we are about to go in camera, or we are in camera. That motion is carried. For the convenience of those who have